We're so happy to see all of you here today. It's really important for all of us to be together regularly because we have to learn together, we have to pray together, and then we have to act together to end the war. My name is Elaine Marie Kinch, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Racine Coalition for Peace and Justice. I just want to point something out. There's a table over there. We have our brochures there. You can also sign up if you would like to get our email messages. And there's something else there. Yes, there is the schedule for the March 4th to Earth Day. That's all on the table over here. Well, it was the 26th of February, and there was an international anti-war Zoom that I attended along with 2,000 people, if you can imagine, over 2,000 people. And it was organized by Code Pink. And Code Pink is a woman-led grassroots organization working to end U.S. war and militarism. So at that time, we decided we would do it today, right? We decided absolutely we have to have a global day of anti-war actions. Well, as you may know, if you're a member of the Racine Coalition, and some of you are, we have focused on Latin America and Palestine, and we did try to stop the war with Iraq, right? So right away I knew I was going to have to call Jim Carpenter. I was absolutely going to have to call him because the Milwaukee. I'm mixed up now. I'm forgetting their name. Peace Action Milwaukee has a much wider scope than we do. So I called Jim, and then what happened is because of him, we have 3 wonderful speakers here from Peace Action, and they're very knowledgeable. They are very experienced. Okay, Jim Carpenter will be the first speaker. He serves on the End the Wars Coalition in Milwaukee. He is a national co-chair of End the Wars and... I'm sorry, wait. This is a long name, very long name that I don't remember. End the Wars and Occupations issue of the Progressive Democrats of America. He was a conscientious objector when he was drafted during the Vietnam War, and he did alternative service by working in a hospital. Jim is an instructor of ecological economics in the Milwaukee Area Technical College. Please welcome Jim.
Hi, everybody. Woo! First, I'm going to lower the mic a little bit for us short people here. Okay, I just want to say there's my wife, Aldine, holding the peace flag. And I just want to thank everybody for being here. This is such an important moment. I don't know if people know, but there's events like this going on all over the world today. Literally hundreds of events in many countries around the world, all calling for an end to the war in Ukraine, all calling for the Russian troops to get out of Ukraine, all calling for Ukraine's sovereignty, all standing in solidarity with the mass murder that is now going on in Ukraine. So let me say put this in context and say a few words, okay? So first of all, I'm glad for this event. I believe in the power of prayer, of group prayer especially. I believe in the power of meditation. I believe that we're going to do that at some point, right? Have a prayer and meditation. I believe that sends energy out that can change humanity. that can change the human consciousness. So thank you for having this, because I believe in that. And thank you for holding this in this plaza for Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King. As you probably know, one of the great sayings of Dr. Martin Luther King is, we must choose between nonviolence and non-existence. And I think there's probably no other time in our history where we've been closer to that stark choice of nonviolence or non-existence. And so it's very important to have it in the square here. First, of course, this is a terrible moment in human history. As I said, mass murder is going on in the Ukraine, and I like to call war mass murder, because that's what it is. When you call it war, you sanitize the horror of war. And so, because I think where there should be a movement to abolish war. Just like mass murder shouldn't exist, neither should war exist. So before I start talking about what we should do about this terrible crisis, I would just like to step back for a second and take a broader picture of war. So I teach economics. And what I teach in economics is that war is the anti-economy. So if you define the purpose of economics, economics organizes resources in order to produce goods and services to meet human needs and wants. So the purpose of war is to organize resources to destroy goods and services and to destroy life itself. So from an economic point of view, war is a totally irrational human activity. And I believe, and as other people believe, there should be a movement to abolish war, just like there is a movement to abolish slavery. A war is evil and is totally irrational. So let me just take a quick show of hands here. How many people believe that there could and should be a movement to abolish war? Thank you very much. That movement needs to happen. So that's the broader picture. But let me get now into this crisis and say what I think I hear the peace movement saying. So the peace movement is saying that it's really important to recognize that there is no military solution to this crisis. There is no military solution to this crisis. Sending more weapons to Ukraine will prolong the war. There'll be more deaths, more human suffering. So let's not prolong the war. And not only that, sending more weapons to Ukraine gets the U.S. more involved in this war. It escalates the conflict, and it increases the possibility of a nuclear annihilation, a nuclear holocaust. I was watching Fox News just yesterday, and there was somebody on Fox News saying, it's every night I have to explain why we cannot put into place a no-fly zone, because that will put us in direct conflict with the Russians and could lead to the Third World War. He said what is going on in Ukraine is horrible. It's terrible. It's evil. But it's even worse. A nuclear holocaust is even worse. And so that's why, as bad as what's happening in the Ukraine, we cannot turn this into World War III. So please, let's pray together today to say no to World War III, no war between NATO and Russia, no war between these powers that have nuclear weapons. So what will I be praying for? What will I be praying for? And I hope everybody joins me. I'm praying for a ceasefire now. Absolutely a ceasefire now, and that we negotiate a ceasefire now, and that then we negotiate after the ceasefire some sort of compromise that allows for a just peace and a just and perpetual peace. And what would that involve? Well, certainly it would involve recognizing the sovereignty of the Ukraine, recognizing their international borders. Obviously, it would involve the Russian troops getting out of the Ukraine. They should have never come in the first place. This is an invasion, this is war, this is mass murder. The Russian troops have to leave. What else would it involve, though? It would also involve these negotiations for a just and lasting peace, recognizing the legitimate security concerns of Russia, the legitimate security concerns of Russia. And what are some of those concerns? That we don't have NATO troops and the weapons on the border of Russia. Let's look at the logic here, folks. We would never accept Russian military on the Canadian border. We would never accept Russian military on the Mexican border. Why would we think the Russians would accept NATO and the U.S. military on our border? So one of the things I think should occur in this negotiation is that no expansion of NATO. Ukraine stays neutral, and we remove troops and weapons and missiles from the border of Russia. So we have to be serious about negotiation. Pardon?
We did not accept Russian weapons in Cuba.
That's right. We did not accept Russian. We almost went to Third World War over weapons in Cuba, right? So we understand the security concerns of Russia, and we have to address those security concerns. And if we had done that to begin with, this war may have been averted. There's no excuse for having this war. It's still murder, and it should be ended right now. But if we would have addressed those security concerns, this may have never happened. And we have to, and the last thing we have to address, or maybe not the last thing, but another thing we have to address is having justice for the people who live in the eastern part of the Ukraine. Those people have been mistreated by the current government, and we have to have justice for them. And so that would... Pardon?
14,000 people in the eastern...
How many thousand? 14,000 people. So have they been treated justly? No. So when we have to make sure those people are treated justly too. So we have to have serious negotiations. We have to have a ceasefire. I was at a rally yesterday, and one of our chants was de-escalation and of course negotiation. So let's maybe say this together, so if we get it into our mindset, what we want is a ceasefire, de-escalation, and negotiation. So can you say it with me? Ceasefire, de-escalation, negotiation. Ceasefire, de-escalation, negotiation. No NATO war with Russia. No NATO war with Russia. Let's avoid nuclear war. Let's stop this murder right now. Let's pray for the victims. I only have 5 minutes. I probably exceeded my 5 minutes, so I won't. You want me to say a few more words? Yeah, I just want to say, if I have the right to say a few more words, let me say a few more words. Okay, so what I'm also going to be praying for, and I hope everybody joins me, is to pray for the victims of this war. Of course, the victims of this war are the Ukrainian people. All the people have been killed or injured, all the millions of refugees. I will be praying for them. I'll also be praying for the Russian soldiers. They're victims too. Some of those people were drafted. They don't want to be there any more than I wanted to be in the Vietnam War. Some of those people have been victims of propaganda and the militarism that exists in Russia. Just like some of us are victims of the propaganda in our own country, right? And so they're victims too. And I'd like them to see the light, how wrong militarism is, how wrong war is. So I'll be praying for them too. I'll be praying for the people in the peace movement in Russia. There's thousands of people out in the streets risking their safety to say no to war. So we should stand in solidarity with the peace movement in Russia. They may be the people who stop this war by saying no to war, and we're going to be out in the streets saying that, even though it's risking our own safety by doing so. We're out here and no one's harassing us. If we're in Russia, we would be in big trouble for being out here saying no to war. So I will be praying to all the victims of war. All of humanity is a victim to war. And so wars have to come to a conclusion. We have to abolish war as a means of settling disputes. Again, I'm so glad that you invited me to speak. I'm so glad that we're going to pray together, and I hope that we're on a turning, that we choose the right path. Humanity is at a turning point right now. We're at the crossroads right now. We can either choose peace or we continue to choose war. If we continue to choose war, it's the possibility it could lead, hopefully not, it could lead to the end of the human race as we know it now. So let's choose peace. There's a path to peace. We just got to be sincere about getting on that path. Thank you.
Thank you. Woo!
Thank you so very, very much, Jim. That was powerful and profound. It was wonderful. I'm so happy you were able to come. And then, of course, you recruited 2 other members of the Racine, of the Milwaukee Coalition. Our next speaker is going to be Julie Enslow. Julie has spent a lifetime working for world peace. She has participated in interfaith dialogue groups on racism in the 60s, and she was active in the open housing campaign. She has taught in the inner city Catholic schools and community centers. However, once upon a time, when she was teaching religion classes at a Catholic high school in the 60s, can you imagine she was bringing in draft counselors and community activists to speak to the students? Well, then what happened was they didn't want her back, right? Because some of those students literally became conscientious objectors to war. Julie has volunteered with the United Farm Workers, their support committee. She has organized celebrations of Earth Day. She's organized food co-ops, and she has cooked for St. Benedict's community meal program. She has also traveled to the Soviet Union and to Israel, Palestine. Let's welcome Julie.
All right, Julie.
Let's go, Julie.
Oh my God, another war. It's just like, will this ever end? You know, so many years. I think back to the first year when I was newly married in 1962, and the Cuban Missile Crisis happened that November. And I thought, well, this is going to be a short marriage because it looked like the end of the world was coming, you know, right before our very eyes. And here we are again, many years later, with this nuclear threat again starting to hang over our heads. This is really serious stuff. You know, when I talk to people about what's going on, I say, you know, really, this is all about NATO. And there will be friends of mine that will say, what? It is? I mean, they just don't know that. They don't get it. And I think, you know, we have a lot of educating to do around these connections. And how actually when NATO was founded back in 1949, in 1949, after the end of the Second World War, it was a mutual defensive alliance. And it consisted of United Kingdom and France initially, then they brought in Belgium and Netherlands and Luxembourg, and then the United States and Canada joined, and then there was Italy and Portugal and Norway and Denmark and Iceland, and then Greece and Turkey, and then West Germany, and then Spain, and then they established their own nuclear policy after becoming very militarized throughout Europe. That in 1954, they had a policy called, well, I don't know, it was called MC-48, but it was that NATO had to use nuclear weapons first if there ever was a war with the Soviet Union. So then in 1955, the Warsaw Pact was initiated with the USSR, with Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, and East Germany. At the end of the Cold War, the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, dissolved. And with it was the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact. So there was no longer these two factions that were at odds. Things had changed so that there was a real opportunity for peace and for coming together and for resolving some of these issues with security for everyone. And at the time, Secretary of State James Baker said to the Soviets and to the Russians at that point, and it was Gorbachev who was president, he said, NATO promises, and I promise, we will not move 1 inch to the east with NATO expansion, not 1 inch to the east. And there were other people that said the same thing, like George Shultz at the time and others. And it was there are a number of instances where this was declared, but it was never put into an official treaty. There's some written evidence of this. There is tapes of it. It happened many times. This promise was made, but it was not kept. The deal was that if Russia would go along with the unification of East and West Germany, that then NATO would pledge not to move to the east. Well, the unification happened, and but the NATO expansion idea was not going to hold. The promise was not going to hold, and there was a lot of warnings by military leaders at the time and by ambassadors and Soviet experts like George Kennan, you may be referring to, had been the U.S. ambassador to Russia, and he was kind of he was an elevated senior foreign policy specialist, and he warned strongly against any expansion of NATO, saying that this could lead to a real disaster. He predicted what's happening right now, back then, and he was absolutely right. So NATO did start to expand, and it was President Clinton who started to really moving the NATO countries towards the east, towards the Russian border. And 14 countries have been added since that time to NATO, 11 of them to the east.
I read that the bombing of Yugoslavia was the beginning of the expansion of NATO.
So, U.S. nuclear weapons then were also deployed into NATO countries. So there's 5 countries in Europe that have U.S. nuclear weapons: Turkey, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany. And the NATO has now deployed missile defense systems in Poland and in the Czech Republic. Now these are, really right on the border of Russia also. And it's a big threat to Russia. So they do not feel like their security has been addressed at all. And actually, years back, I think it was in 1954 or 55, Russia itself had asked if they could be part of NATO and have a universal security system, and they were denied that opportunity. So then in 2014, there was a real crisis in the area of Ukraine. Excuse me. Thank you. NATO had expanded its forces into the areas around there, and Ukraine had a president who was pro-Russian, and a lot of the country, is very split there. A lot of Russian culture, and Russians, half the country speaks Russian as well as Ukrainian. And so there was this crisis that came, and more of an opportunity was given for Ukraine to start thinking, well, I think we better join NATO. We'd like to join NATO, but they were not ever invited to join NATO by NATO. And that's clear. Meanwhile, NATO had really become an offensive alliance, and it was doing really offensive military actions. For example, in Serbia in 1999, they invaded, in Afghanistan in 2001, in Iraq in 2004, Libya 2011. These were aggressive military interventions, and huge profits were being made by the U.S. weapons industry. And so they had this deal that when a new country was brought into NATO, they had to get all new weapons because their weapons had to be compatible with all of the other NATO countries' weapons. So that this was, I mean, talk about a scam. You know, this really was. They've made incredible amounts of profits off of these new NATO countries. So, the current crisis evolved. Jim talked about some of what had happened there in the Ukraine. They've turned away from their elected president. There was a U.S.-led coup that overthrew President Yanukovych, I believe, who was the more pro-Russian in his dealings. And this U.S. CIA-led coup overthrew him and put in this more right-wing regime. And there are Nazis involved in this. There were, people say, oh, no, that's ridiculous. There's no Nazis involved in this. But there are. There is on the eastern part, or the western part of Ukraine, there are a lot of pro-Nazi, neo-Nazis that formed some militias and were involved in the overthrow of the previous president. And they continue to operate within the Ukraine military and are the ones who really have been kind of leading the charge in eastern Ukraine and the Donbass region against the Russian-speaking people there, where actually they had a referendums in those two areas of the Donbass, and they voted huge amounts, like 90-some%, to be independent from the Ukraine. Not to join Russia necessarily, but to be independent. And Ukraine has immediately brought in their troops, and there's been a war ever since for the last 12 years. And it's so many people have died, as you mentioned before. So with the current crisis,
They passed a law that nobody can speak Russian. The Russian language actually.
yeah, you're right. The Russian language was outlawed by the new government. Yeah. So at any rate, we've got a really strong connection here with why NATO is involved in all this, and it's really important that that we recognize that expanding NATO is a terrible idea, and that we do have to recognize the security concerns of Russia, and that perhaps Putin isn't just a crazy, mad person he had some real concerns for the last few years about what was threatening their country. And then when Ukraine said that they wanted to build nuclear weapons, which they've done for the last couple of years, they've been stating that they wanted to do that if they were not admitted to NATO, that Ukraine would build their own nuclear forces. And they've got the stuff to do it. They have a lot of plutonium from the nuclear power plants. They could do that. And having another nuclear power right next door to Russia would just, Putin says, no way. So it's a complex situation. And we just have to hope and pray that this gets resolved in a peaceable manner, because the results could be disastrous for all of us. So
no NATO expansion, right? Very good, Julie.
Thank you, Julie. Boy, that's stuff we're going to have to study. We have to know that, and we've got to let our friends know about that too. One of our members has a summary, and and the summary is Russia out of Ukraine, NATO out of existence. So we are now going to have our last speaker. And his name is George Paz Martin. George has been a 3-term national co-chair of United for Peace and Justice, the largest peace organization in the United States, and he has been the program director of Peace Action Wisconsin. He is a member of the Green Party of the United States, their international committee, and he works through the World Social Forum, and as such, he has been on fact-finding mission, delegations and presentations to Iraq, Venezuela, Peru, Kenya, London, and Athens. He has also served the homeless, especially veterans. Here's how it all happened. When he was 16 years old, he was literally 10 feet away from Dr. Martin Luther King during a King's I Have the Dream speech. That's when he decided. That's when he became an activist. So he was part of the civil rights movement, the Black Panther Party, and the War on Poverty. Please welcome George.
All right, George.
Okay.
George.
I started a little earlier than 16. No, at 14, as a freshman at Marquette University High School, I could not practice with our swimming team because they practiced at the Eagles Club, and with my father being black. I'm a love child from World War II. You know, my mother's name is Paz, which means peace. So I couldn't practice with my team. And so we began integrating the Eagles Club when I was 14 years old. And we got it done. Before their convention came, before Father Grappi demonstrated, it was already a done deal. You know? So, but anyway, I'm just saying, you know, we're out here. And sad to say, I left my notes on my desk. Julie didn't want to turn around and drive back to Milwaukee, so I got nothing to say here. But I got a lot to say. You know, when we talk about sanctions, what comes to my mind are its effect on the people of Cuba, on Venezuela, on Iraq. And I've been there personally in those countries to see those effects. So right now we're adding another word in front of it. It's called targeted sanctions. And that's so important, not just sanctions, but targeted sanctions. Sanctions can be diplomatic, they can be financial, they can be sports, they can be entertainment. And right now we're seeing the whole kit and caboodle in terms of what's happening with Russia right now. And there are different organizations that levy sanctions. United Nations does the most, but there are many other organizations. And I'll tell you, as we look at this situation, and then I agree with everything Jim said except for one thing. You know, it used to be that we went to war and we made money. Now we go to war to make money. Racine and the military-industrial complex is already rubbing their hands and making plans. Even in the environmental area, you know, we're talking about cutting that pipeline from Russia to Germany, but at the same time, we're planning to send fracked gas overseas once that pipeline gets cut. You know, so there are many people looking to make money off of this. And also, there's kind of devious things in between. I'll tell you, as we talk about the sanctions, especially in terms of oil, and I say pretty current on things, but I was shocked to understand that the U.S. buys 3% of our oil from Russia. I was shocked. I was shocked to find out that 8%, we buy 8% of our energy products from Russia. What kind of sense does that make? And so when we talk about a boycott on oil, you know, this administration is saying, well, no, it'll raise the price of gas. But I'll tell you, I'd rather pay more gas than have blood on my hands for the people who die in the Ukraine. I no doubt that. I would rather do that than see what's happening. And you can say, well, you know, what's the benefit of these boycotts? Well, already. The sanctions, I'm sorry. Already. Russia is having a problem selling 23% of their energy products. Already, they're struggling to sell those products. And we could say, oh, that's going to affect them, but at the same time, we got a situation, they've got a situation over there where Putin doesn't have a bank account. He doesn't need one. He goes to his buddies and the oligarchs and say, give me $1 million, and he gets it. And there's this big question about, well, who are the oligarchs? Well, we just put sanctions on 14 of them and their families and associates. You know, here in the U.S., it's Jeff Bezos who makes $18 billion a year. Out of those 14, more than half of them make over $12 billion a year. Please let me talk, okay? Let me talk. And no, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. These guys have got 2 and 3 yachts. And bless Italy, they just confiscated about 4 yachts and a whole lot of property. Their wealth is in cryptocurrency. It's in real estate. One of the moguls in London spent $18 billion on an apartment complex for his daughter. $18 billion. You know, and that's on real estate. It's in other areas, in luxury areas. Putin prides himself on his $1 million watch collection. Each watch is over $1 million. And he's not had to be accountable to anyone for a long, long time. And so he's been getting away with it. And that's why he takes a step further and a step further. You know, part of this whole effort, and you can say, oh, he's saying I'm fighting the Nazis in Ukraine. He's dividing up that country, and he wants the whole eastern part of it, which will cut off western Ukraine from any water, from any ocean. And we know how important all of that is in terms of trade. So, you know, this goes a lot further in terms of intent. And I'll tell you, and it's not been mentioned yet, you know, and I'll just hit this part. Russia, Jim mentioned the protesters. 8,000 men, women, and children have been arrested protesting this war. Russians in their own homeland. 8,000. And they continue. Also, when I say men, women, and children, we look at the Ukraine. The kids. You know, I was in Iraq after shock and awe and the bombing and what that did to them mentally. But these kids, being separated from their fathers, seeing the bombs, being rushed out of the country, they're going to live with this for the rest of their lives. You know, and we don't have answers. We don't have answers for our own kids who are exposed to violence here and traumatics. So, you know, this continues on, and I don't want to talk a lot longer, but this whole deal of the no-fly zone. It's important to understand that. You know, it's kind of natural. Well, we want a no-fly zone. Well, that means that we've had our jets in the air, and the Russians have their jets in the air over the Ukraine, and pretty soon we're dropping atomic bombs, nuclear bombs. You know what? You know, that's a reality that we're trying to avoid. And here is the president of the Ukraine, you know, on a Zoom call with all the senators saying, we need this no-fly zone. We need it. And what's happened in between yesterday was Poland popped up and said, we will give the Ukrainians airplanes. A big thing in my mind was, well, we give them jet planes. That's a whole learning curve in terms of how to fly these modern jet planes. But the Polish have old Russian planes that the Ukrainians know how to fly. And they're holding that back. You know why? Because they think they're next. And they're holding it back to say, we will give these planes to the Ukraine if the U.S. gives us new fighter jets. Dealing, parlaying, in the middle of all of this. You know, it gets really complicated. And at the same time, we would hope that things turn around within that country. within Russia. The sanctions that I said they can be financial. We look at U.S. corporations and international corporations pulling out. Apple's pulling out. Other people are pulling out. I saw a film the other day that just blew my mind. All these countries have different levels of class and economy. And when IKEA said they're closing their stores in Russia, it was like Black Friday. You wouldn't believe it. Hundreds and hundreds of people in there on the rush to buy furniture. Yeah. I wonder if the meatballs were on sale. But those things do have an effect. They have an effect. But at the same time, the Russian people themselves have been so deprived within their economy. Their standard of living has been lowered and lowered and lowered. And that's why they're on the streets too. So we hope that this can turn around within Russia. We hope that this can turn around, period. I'll tell you, after 8 years during the Iraq War, we all gave a lot of our time. And I gave a big amount of my time, and I'm sitting here saying, here we go again. Here we go again, folks. And I don't have an answer. The answers are within those people. The answer is not us going to war. The answer is not getting more weapons there. That's not the answer. That just leads to more violence. And I wish I had an answer. My phone rings. My phone rings saying, George, what should we do? Well, number one, as activists, our number one tool is education. As activists, our primary role is to move the people, to affect our politicians, to do the right thing. We can't do it by ourselves. And sometimes it just takes too long as far as some of us are concerned. But we need to get this information out. We had a rally. Julie's got a couple flyers, and we say, we're out in the street, and what do we look like saying no to NATO with the average guy walking by or woman? What do we look like? So it's something that's complex and needs to be explained. And so we tried to do that in this flyer, and we don't have many, but we'll leave it with you, and if you can duplicate it with your group. But again, it's educating the public. That is so important. And so as this moves forward, we hope that people do the right thing. And please join me. No more war. No more war. No more war. Thank you. Peace and love.
Thank you so much, George. Thank you very, very much. Oh my goodness. That's what we're doing here, is we're learning so much about NATO and sanctions.
Sanctions actually refer to all military people, not only the oligarchs.
I'm not hearing you well, but I can't hear you well. But anyway, let me see. Well, I want to just remind everybody, and Peace to Action too, you have a piece of literature you want us to duplicate. It can be put on this table. And for those of you that don't get we have our brochures here, so you can see who we are. You can also sign up to be on our email list. So, now I'm going to, I would like to introduce Sonali. Sonali Knotek, she's my sister co-chairperson. She's right here. Yes. She is very well known right now, and that's because she is one of the chief organizers of the March 4th to Earth Day. That began yesterday. That started. It started on Friday. So she will do the closing, and she will introduce Pastor Bill Tompkins. Welcome, Sonali.
All right, so now.
Okay, just a few words on behalf of the Racine Coalition for Peace and Justice. I want to thank the wonderful speakers for filling in the pieces of the puzzle for us today. One thing that we certainly must do is to look for alternative sources of information to test what we hear in the mainstream media. As Michael Parenti, political scientist and author, once said, quote, "The enormous gap between what US leaders do in the world and what Americans think their leaders are doing is one of the great propaganda accomplishments of the dominant political ideology."
We've been talked about by the propaganda.
As the speakers have said, this war, like every other war, is about resources and who controls them. This is why we need to work on doing all we can to move away from our reliance on fossil fuels. Ramping up the infrastructure for renewables, powering homes with wind and solar, electrifying our transportation systems are some of the things that can happen. And because all energy sources carry ecological costs, we must also reduce demand for energy overall. This leads me to invite you all who are in Racine, from Milwaukee, you can travel also. For the next 7 weeks, we are doing, this week Friday, we are having one of the events that is part of the March 4th for Earth Day events that are happening around the state. And this week Friday, we will be talking about solar installation and solar power. Mayor Mason will be speaking in front of at the City Hall Annex. And if you can make it at noon on Friday, this coming Friday, that'll be great. All right, thanks again for coming, and thank you to the speakers. Reverend Bill Tompkins is going to lead us in a prayer. We will ring the bell when he starts the prayer, and after the prayer, we will stand in silence for 2 minutes in solidarity with all the people who are suffering in this world. After 2 minutes, I will ring the bell again, and then the vigil will be done. Thanks for coming, Pastor.
All right.
Well, thank you those who spoke before me, and it's just really good to be able to come together to pray for our world, to pray for those hidden wars that we don't see on TV, those things that are going on all over in many different nations. And so we just want to be able to join together. And so if we could just for a moment, just be quiet for a moment. I know a bell's going to ring, but just be quiet for a moment. I'll let the bell ring and then I'll get started. Well, Father, we do pray for peace in our land, especially what's been spoken about by so many of our speakers, that there would be a ceasefire and proper negotiations to go on in Ukraine. We ask for people to open up their eyes to some of the hidden things that are taking place, some of the manipulation of men. Father, for much too long, we have done evil against one another for unjust reasons, Father, and that's taking place now. So, Father, it says that if we turn to you and we ask you to heal our land, that you would heal it. That you'd heal our land on how we misuse it. That you heal our land and on how we hurt one another and harm one another and abuse one another. That you heal our land, Lord God, when it comes to women being improperly treated. That you heal our land when it comes to the young people being used and improperly taught at this time. Father, we're asking that you would heal the land that's going on in Ukraine and all that which is surrounding. We ask for wisdom of our Senate, our Congress, and the NATO leaders. We pray for our president that he would have wisdom on the proper steps to take. Lord, some of the reactions, some of the threats, and some of the things that are going on right now that would escalate the war, we ask that those voices would be silent. Father, we do pray for peace in our land. We ask for healing of it. In your incredible name, amen. One more bell. One more bell.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's wonderful to be with you. Wonderful to have you with us. Bye for now.